to the Honest Field Guide podcast, a weekly show dedicated to winning in entrepreneurship. I'm your host, JinJa Birkenbeuel. I'm the CEO of Birk Creative, a leadership, brand strategy, and visual identity agency dedicated to helping scale brands and assist with their adaptability with the market. On my show, you get to eavesdrop in on intimate conversation with business leaders and inspired entrepreneurs, designed to give you tips and strategies so your own business can thrive. Subscribe and join me each week for laughter, inspiration, and honest stories. Hey everybody, welcome back to my show, the Honest Field Guide podcast. My name is JinJa Birkenbeuel. I am your host, and I'm so glad that you're here today. You could be anywhere, but you've decided to come to my show, which I am so grateful for. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you could please follow my show everywhere on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, everywhere you listen and see podcast content. And if you could also like my show on Apple Podcasts, and if you could even leave a 4-star review, that would be totally fantastic. I know I always ask for that, but it really is important to leave podcasters reviews of their shows because that means more people listen and people like Apple say, oh, let's give them some more love. I'm also on Spotify, so if you want to leave a like or a review or a comment on Spotify, that would be great as well. Really appreciate it. So anyway, now that that's out of the way, I want to say I am so crazed about my guest today. I am absolutely crazed. This is somebody that I've known for a really, really long time. And for those of you that have been listening to my show for the last few years, because I launched in 2018, you'll know that most of the songs from my music, Utah Carol, I use on my podcast. And, the start of my band was a really important part of my life. It was before I had children, and it was really when I was in a transition with my career. I was working in corporate, and I had a bunch of different jobs. And then at one point, I was like, I wanted to learn how to play music because I felt like my life was not really having a lot of meaning and I wanted to actually create something special and different. So I started making music and, lo and behold, my husband's a guitar player, Grant, and our band is Utah Carol. And I was like, oh my gosh, we should actually form a band. And so I dragged him on stage with me and he was like, I can't believe I'm on stage singing a song with you. And it was a song that I wrote called Lipstick Red, which is actually not a really good song. I actually still remember it and I probably still having a recording of it. But anyway, fast forward, we ended up starting a band, and I did drag and kicking and screaming into the public space of being in a band. But anyway, the reason why this story is important is that I had no idea that I know I had a vision and a dream for what I wanted for the band, but I didn't really know how far I was going to be able to take the band with my husband. I wasn't sure what we were going to really do with it. But we do have 3 albums, Wonder Wheel, which is our first record, Comfort for the Traveler, which is our second album, and Rodeo Queen. And you can actually find all of our songs on YouTube by going to youtube.com/Utah Carol, or wherever you listen to music, frankly. Apple has all of our songs. But anyway, I'm pretty obsessed with my own songs and creativity. But I really think that, Grant and I, we may not have found as much success, and maybe we wouldn't have leveled up our production values, would have not have been for the expansion of our network of quality people working on our records and for people that cared about our music and sort of taught us things about what's a master, why is it important to have your own masters? Why is it important, for you to control and own your own property? Do you know what it means to have points? Have you ever talked to a lawyer about things like this? And then also just sort of teaching us things about mixing consoles and quality instruments, and then working with quality people, for example, that can actually go into a studio and nail something the first time. That's something that, we really hadn't thought about. So anyway, this person that we ended up bringing in, we read about him in this, I don't even know if the paper's alive anymore. It's called Illinois Entertainer. There was some essay or article or interview with him. And I was like, he looks really interesting. I don't remember exactly what the ad said, but I was thinking to myself, we should probably go there. And Grant and I were like, yes, we should definitely go visit. So what we did was we called this person up and we said, hey, we are thinking of, recording or fixing or doing something with our album. And I just remember on the phone, he was asking a lot of questions and I was like, damn, I feel like he's interviewing us. I was like, what's going on? What do I have to prove here? So anyway, he invited us in his studio we had a 5-song demo, and it was made on old-fashioned tape. Like, we had a 4-track mixer. We used samplers. We had some, like, random microphones. We had an old Hammond organ that we mic'd. It was just like, back in the day. And even though he wasn't really a producing type of a mixer, I feel like when we got there and interviewed him and he interviewed us, I thought to myself, this feels like it's going to be right. And one of the things that stood out to me about this person was he was very clear. My job as an engineer, as a mixing engineer, is not to teach you how to write songs. It's not to teach you how to be. It's really to be in the room and help you communicate your vibe and your vision the way you want it to be communicated. I'm not here to recreate what you've got. And, he listened to our stuff after he told us that, because I think he was like, he wasn't sure if he was going to take us on, because we were very corporate looking. We were not like rock and rollers. And what he said? He said, I really love this vibe. There's something about it. There's something quirky about it. And I thought, yes, he gets it. You know what I mean? So anyway, it's just one of those things that we then actually developed a long time relationship, and we worked with him for a long time. I mean, our second record had 15 songs, 15 tracks on each song. And, back then, I think 15 tracks on each song was a lot, but, not for him. And, we even had a situation with our second record, Comfort for the Traveler, when we brought in our demo and we had like all these orchestral instruments on it, and they were all sampled. And he's like, wait a minute, we're not using sampled violins, are we? And I said, well, what do you mean? We don't have a violin player. He's like, well, we're going to get one for you. So that was like the process where we started realizing we're in a really amazing place with a really amazing person who's not only, we're his client, but he's actually teaching us how to think differently about how we create music. Okay. So anyway, long story short, there was one moment where I looked at Grant and Grant looked at me and he's like, how did we actually end up getting here? I'm like, I do not know, but it's really because of our mixing engineer, Craig Bauer. So let me read a little bio about him, because I could go on, and that's not what this show's about. Like, I could talk endlessly about this, but I really want him to come on and listen and talk. So Craig Bauer is a Grammy-winning mixing engineer whose magic has shaped some of the most iconic records in modern music, from Kanye West, The College Dropout, to Lupe Fiasco's Food and Liquor, and even my little old indie Americana band, Utah Carol. Bauer's technical expertise and creative touch have left an indelible mark on countless hits. His work spans genres, blending artistry with precision to create the soundtracks that have defined generations. But Craig's story goes far beyond the studio booth. A true entrepreneur in the music industry, Bauer understands the intersection of creativity and businesses like few others. He built Hinge Studios from the ground up, turning a small Chicago space into a legendary recording haven that attracted the industry's best and brightest. His journey is not about great records. It's about resilience, adaptability, and knowing how to navigate the ever-evolving music business. From handling the pressures of big-name projects to balancing artistry with commercial demands, Craig Bauer has mastered the skills necessary for both sonic excellence and entrepreneurial success. Welcome, Craig, to my show, The Honest Field Guide.
Well, thank you. That was quite the introduction.
Well,
I wonder who wrote that bio. It sure doesn't sound like me.
Well, it is you. And, it's been a long time. And I feel like I've always wanted to have you on my show, but I haven't really had the space to kind of, wrap my head around how much music we created in your studio, right? I mean, there's really so much to talk about. And, you're still working in the business, right? You're still doing the work.
Yes, every day.
I know. It's great. So I want to sort of just start digging in a little bit. Because I don't know that people really know who you are. They don't really know where you came from or what you.
I don't know if I know who I am.
You don't know if you know. Well, we are in interesting times. So help me understand. Can you talk a little bit about where you grew up and what kind of community you grew up in? And I want to also understand about your schooling. Were your schools integrated? Was your neighborhood all white? Like, how did you grow up? Because you're in a very different place now.
I grew up in the whitest suburb of the east side of Cleveland that you could possibly imagine. There were no African-American people all the way through high school. I don't think there was a single.
I didn't even know that when I said that. I swear to God. Okay, go ahead, continue.
Yeah, so I grew up on the east side of Cleveland in a very white bread, wholesome middle class situation where we weren't wealthy and we weren't poor. It couldn't be any more middle class. And I couldn't give school was completely uninteresting to me, frankly. So I just kind of worked my way through it.
I want to understand then. I love that you said that because I have three sons, and my youngest son has that same thing, but he hasn't articulated it the way you just did because he's only 16. But since you didn't like school, what was going on? I mean, were you involved in music? Were you playing instruments? I mean, were you listening to music? Like, how did you get through it? What was going on with music?
Uh, Musically speaking, the fact that I got into music was complete happenstance. It happened at a luncheon that my mother was at, where she was with a friend whose her mother was a piano teacher, and just out of complete accidental, whatever you want to call it, I was asked if I wanted to take piano lessons, and I think this was fourth grade, fifth grade. I said yes, and I took to it very quickly and found it interesting. And from that moment on, the only thing I ever cared about was music.
That's
Way,
incredible.
way more than school. I couldn't care less about school.
So, um, you learned to read music.
I learned to read music, and I started on a xylophone. And I learned how to read music with the xylophone before ever being put in front of a piano. So I understood. I was taught music theory before I was taught anything else. And that is a very important factor in my entire career, if you ask my opinion.
You know, so my oldest child, Dexter, is a classically trained jazz pianist. And I think one of his most difficult classes is theory. Like, theory is something that really, hurts. I mean, but you loved it. I don't even understand that. You have an engineering brain if you love theory that young.
Um, I don't know if that would be considered engineering. It was just taught to me, so it's just something that you learn how to play a scale, and you learn how to play all the scales, and then you start understanding the circle of fifths and how every fifth from C to G, and then you add one sharp, and every time you go up a fifth, you add another sharp. And I don't know. I don't know why I took to it. I have no idea. It just made sense to me, and I must have enjoyed it because I studied classical piano all the way through college.
Oh my goodness. So, but backing up to high school though, so you started learning to play piano in elementary school, and then you got to high school, and then what did you do in high school as far as music was concerned? Like, if you hated school in elementary school, high school must not have been something you were looking forward to.
Like I said, it's not that I hated school. It's just that I didn't participate in the academic side of schooling, period. It wasn't interesting to me. The only thing I cared about was music. At some point, I think in junior high, I picked up a guitar and taught myself how to play guitar very poorly at first and over a long period of time. And oddly, now I spend way more time playing guitars than I do playing a piano for whatever reason. I studied classical music at Ohio State, and I studied music theory. I've got a great music theory story for you from Ohio State. And I have a next door neighbor growing up, or had a next door neighbor growing up, who was the Garfunkel to my Simon, in that he didn't play an instrument, but he was a singer. And the first time we ever performed together was in, I think, sixth grade in school. That relationship lasted all the way through a couple of years after college, where we were a band or a duo that gigged for decades, literally decades. And that's how I made a living through college and for years and years after college.
So, when you were in high school and college, what kind of music were you listening to? Were you listening to classical? Were you listening to blues, rock and roll? What was going on?
I studied classical music, but I listened to what was pop music at the time. I listened to pop radio completely. When pop music back in the 70s and 80s is very different than what pop music is now.
You think?
I grew up on James Taylor. That was huge when I was a kid. The The first vinyl record I ever bought with my own money was from a band called Styx, which is a Chicago band. 20 somethings now will not know what that is, but that was one of the biggest bands on the planet when I was in junior high school, and oddly ended up working with that band a few years after my studio opened in Chicago. And the leader of that band is a very close friend of mine. And from that very first record that I worked with them on, I've worked with them ever since. And I've had the odd luck of having worked with many of the people that I idolized as a teenager, which is bizarre and amazing to me.
So, when you graduate from college, what was your degree in?
Music education and classical piano.
That is so bizarre. Oh my
What makes that bizarre?
I mean, because like you were the mixing engineer for some of the greatest hip hop albums we've ever had, and what?
Well, as we talk about,
we're going to talk about that later, but I'm just like, I didn't even know this about you.
I don't know how you could not know that about me.
I just don't know. I just feel like I walked into your glorious, amazing, vibing studio, and I never would have thought that you were an music education major. Why did you choose that as a major instead of a performing pianist or something?
Well, I studied classical piano all the way through college as well, so that was a minor, but the major was music education because I was how do you go out and make a living as a classical pianist? Unless you're the top 1% in the world, you're not going to make a living doing that. So I don't think I ever really had any designs of being a music teacher anywhere, but I certainly didn't have any designs on studying anything else seriously. So it was more by default than anything else. I didn't know what I was going to do, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, okay, fast forward to your college degree. You got it. You graduated. You were playing out with your band. What happened from that point to you deciding or realizing or understanding, oh, I think I'm going to be a professional mixing engineer? Like, that's a huge, seriously, from music education to classical to gigging with like a rock band, and then you're going to be a mixing engineer and then doing hip hop. Tell me how you got to that place.
It was very simple, actually. So let's go back to my next door neighbor that I gigged with for decades. At some point was it high school or junior high? I don't remember. Maybe 11th grade. We were asked to actually go into a recording studio in Cleveland, Ohio, and record a cover of an Eric Carmen song. I don't even remember what it was for. And Eric Carmen had this huge hit called All By Myself, which later Celine Dion covered. And one of the biggest Celine Dion records of all time. And we were asked to go in and record this cover of this thing. Again, I don't even remember why. And I dragged in a Fender Rhodes, and it was like the only professional recording studio in Cleveland, Ohio. And they stuck him and me in front of a U87 microphone with my Fender Rhodes, and we recorded this thing. And I remember putting on headphones and hearing ourselves in headphones with reverb, and I was just utterly blown away from that second. And then my entire future is totally based on what happened in that 1 second. It was just mind-blowing to me. And then from literally that moment on, it was a one path, one focus, nothing else from that moment.
So what is the path and the focus, though?
Something to do. Well, originally I think it was to have a career as a musician and be able to work in recording studios. But then I quickly found out that I was more interested in the toys than I was writing songs. And as a senior, I don't remember if it was a junior or senior, I remember going to my father and saying, I want to buy this little 4-track recorder that I used to write to companies. This is before the internet. So you would write to companies and they would send you brochures, pamphlets on their equipment. And I would write to all these companies and they would send me all this stuff, and I'd sit there and I'd pour over it over and over. And I found out about this 4-track recorder from a company called Tascam, and a little 6-channel mixer. And I pleaded with my father to buy this for me. And, that kind of money in a middle class, it wasn't insignificant. And he made a deal with me that if I think in 11th grade, went out and got a job, he would fund this with the loan, and he put an envelope in his desk drawer, and every paycheck, 90% of it, would go into this envelope until I paid this $2,002.25 off. And I still can picture the receipt from the music store. And eventually I paid it off. So my career started with that 4-track recorder, and I still have pictures of this equipment from my basement in my home from back in 79, 80. So that's how it all started.
So did you have clients already? I mean, how did you actually?
No.
What was like? Were you recording just yourself?
I had another friend that went to my high school that she would write songs, and then I would record her. So that's basically the beginning of actually having clients. But this wasn't a paying thing. This was just a friend who I'm still in contact with now. Do I have to say it? 50 years later, 40 years later. Oh my God.
It's okay. It's okay if you date yourself. I'm the one with ageism, not you.
Yeah, that's two things.
So let me ask you this. How did you just do this all on your own? Did you have any type of mentor whatsoever? And I'm asking you this because, starting that path back then is a very different path than people are doing it now, right? I feel like some of the young people in this business, they don't feel like they need a mentor. They just go on social media, learn some stuff on YouTube, and then they feel like they're ready. And I feel like you had a very long journey, like many of us did back then when technology was much more rudimentary, to, hone the craft, learn the craft, and really get into studying. And even if we weren't studying in a formal environment like college, like some students now, they actually go to school and they go to mixing and engineering school, and they have people telling them how to do stuff, right?
That did not exist. So everything that I learned was completely and totally self-taught from this very unbelievably rudimentary system that you talk about, which is unbelievably different than the way the world works now, not surprisingly. However, I had another next door neighbor who was...
Wait, what neighborhood did you live in again?
Lyndhurst, Ohio. And wait, oddly enough, Eric Carmen, who wrote All By Myself, who is, just recently passed away. I don't remember how much older than he was, but he actually went to my high school long before I did. But he is from the same part of Cleveland that I am from, which was, interesting in that. So I had another next door neighbor who was the record distributor in the Midwest. So all the records, literally
okay,
all.
Suspicious.
Why suspicious?
Because it's like you were in like a mini Warner Brother environment. Like you were like the.
Well, he wasn't. He was just a distributor. He wasn't on the musical side of anything. You could be distributing toothpaste, and doesn't make you a dentist. He just happened to be, and at some point in, I think this is after I graduated college, he got into managing bands. And he managed a R&B group, a huge R&B group in the very early 80s or mid 80s called the Dazz Band. They had one unbelievably huge hit called Let It Whip. And because he ultimately got into the music side, as opposed to just the distribution side, he ended up opening a recording studio in downtown Cleveland, Ohio. With a partner who had owned a studio in Cleveland forever. So I had this unbelievable opportunity while after graduating college, in between gigging, to hang out in this recording studio in downtown. However, the guy that ran that studio hated the fact that I was friends with the guy who owned the studio and wouldn't let me in the room except for when he wasn't there. So
What? Okay.
I was an intern. I wasn't getting paid, but this guy that ran the studio would not let me into the room whenever there were clients there. But the owner said, "Here's the keys. Go there on weekends. Go out there on nights. Do whatever you want. Just don't tell Kirk Yano that you're there." So I would go into this studio and just mess around with the equipment and basically learn how to use a larger setup than this little 4-track system that I had at home. It certainly wasn't the sophistication of what's happening now, but I had these unbelievably lucky breaks where there just happened to be people around me where I had this opportunity to learn more, and I took complete advantage of it. You didn't even know this stuff, did you?
I did not know this stuff. And every single person that comes on my show that has had extraordinary success like you, everybody says the same thing. They were prepared. They were definitely curious. The curious mindset is all the way through there. And they did have opportune moments where they met people that changed their lives, right? And I think that I hear that a lot. I mean, every successful person has those types of stories.
Yeah, but it's complete happenstance. Yeah, if that opportunity wasn't there, God only knows what I'd be doing right now.
Did you have a manual when you were learning to use the equipment in there? Was there a book? What the
No.
hell? I'm sorry.
No. But a mixing console, whether it's 64 channels or 4 channels, basically works the same. Or back then, computers were not involved. There were tape machines and there were mixing consoles. Analog mixing consoles had volume controls, had tone controls, and basically and level controls to the speakers. So how large it was really had nothing to do with its functionality compared to this tiny little thing that I had.
And you know what? Like, the sound of records back then is so different than now. But I want to actually move a little bit to a different place with you now. So, you were doing all this, and you were an intern. I'm like, how did you have a job? Because I'm trying to understand where did you get the entrepreneurial? Like, where did you decide? Where did the process start? Where did the seed start being planted in your mind that I'm going to do this for a living and I'm going to do it for myself versus let me go work for Warner Brothers and like Dowd and become a union worker, right? I'm serious.
Well, I was gigging 7 days a week, probably 10 gigs a week during the same period of time where I'd be going down to this recording studio when nobody was there. But ultimately, I moved to Chicago. I got married. I was still gigging a little bit in Chicago, and I had a small recording setup in a condo in Chicago and continued that and started recording people out of an apartment building in the same way that I was recording my friend back in Cleveland. Those were paying gigs, unbelievably low paying gigs, but that's how that started in a home studio, which was not a thing back then. And I would get phone calls from the doorman of this building that I was upsetting the neighbors because I was making too much noise. But I was that same Illinois Entertainer. I would put an ad in the Illinois Entertainer to have people come and hire me to record little tiny demos. So that's where those seeds were really planted as far as making a living doing this. And I loved doing it, and I was way more interested in the technical side of the stuff, regardless of my musical background, than writing songs and becoming an artist. One thing led to another, frankly, and I had the ability and source from, frankly, family money of the woman that I married, where I was able to take out a very, to me at that point, very large loan, which is an unbelievable amount of pressure, and build a recording studio in a building at the very entrance to downtown Chicago. And that's where that started. And I took what was a little hobby out of a condo and started a business, which was an unbelievable amount of pressure to borrow money from your wife's family to start a business.
You think? You think?
Yes, I do think.
God. I wonder.
It was very stressful. It was very stressful.
it makes me think about like, wow, how long was that legal agreement? Like I'm trying to like I think back to my own marriage, and I've been married 30 years. And I just remember how much pressure I felt, like just asking for $1,000 to help build our fireplace. So like
Yeah.
I felt, and I, I
No,
felt
it was a loan. It was on paper. I had to write a check to accountants every single month for decades.
oh my God,
And
sounds like torture.
the if you only knew the and it started. What was originally built was serious, but it grew and grew and grew, and it kept taking more and more money, and which I was making, and buying more sophisticated gear from day one. And long story short, it turned out to be very successful, but the pressures involved in it and the amount of time invested in doing that is not something to take lightly. I don't care what business you're in. Nobody I know that was successful in any business started it and was like, okay, I work from 9 to 5. Like, that's not a thing when you start a business.
Entrepreneurship is the only path to wealth in any context or any definition that you have of wealth. There's no other way.
As opposed to bankruptcy.
Well, that's true. But what I love about the story, to me, number one, and and I had this conversation recently with Congressman McGarvey. He's a Democratic Democratic congressman from Kentucky. And I also had a conversation the other day with Lenny Stern. He's one of the partners in a company called SS&K in New York. And what I love about these conversations, especially when it comes to like quote unquote breadwinning women, which is what I am in my family, having colleagues, relationships, marriages, friendships, whatever, with men that, as stressful as it can be to be in a society in America where, having a woman, be on top every time, all the time with everything, sometimes it's just like guys get bullied on the playground. But I really do respect men that have no intimidation or no fear or no shame, in having an environment where you have a woman that, might also be a mother, who might also have a business or might have some money, that actually, in partnership, you can, build something together, even if it ends up in the end being in ruins and, bursting into flames. But still, it takes a special kind of a male, in my opinion. And I speak from a woman's perspective, of course.
Well, I don't know that I don't know that I would.
That is my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay, don't you come at me, because no. I'm like
I just don't know if that saying that there was no fear involved would be accurate. There's plenty of fear involved. It's one thing to start a business with your wife's family money and make it successful, as opposed to taking a loan from your wife's family's, money from your wife's family.
Okay, that's fair. That you know what? That's actually fair. That's actually fair. And I will say this. I actually want to go back a little bit. So what I loved is that you started really humble with a tiny little thing in your apartment, and then, I'm interested in your vision around getting to this new studio, because I remember when we walked in, Grant and I, the first time we ever walked into a studio together, thinking about putting our record together, I was blown away by the quality, the branding, the vibe, the lighting, the carpet, the texture on the furniture. Like, it was just it just felt amazing. And I was like, you know what, these guys are probably going to be like, making us feel like bad or egos. And it wasn't like that at all. It was like, you walked in and you no, seriously, you walked in, you're like, oh my God, I'm a professional musician. Like, you literally had an environment where you had your workers, your staff, your interns, everybody circled around the artist and made them feel, at least that's how I felt and how Grant felt. We felt honored and valued. And so I feel like there's something that goes into that process that money cannot buy.
You do realize that at that early period, what I thought I knew
a joke.
And what I really knew might have been
I just told you my heart and everything's Okay, go
it's
ahead.
Not a joke.
Okay,
it's that literally I started this business with a understanding of how all this worked, but with no real world experience. So it was, it's not something that you start a business and you're an expert at. You learn, along the way is in the same way that your clients are learning all the way. I mean, obviously I knew the basics from, or even more than the basics, and I had great gear at the time, but I was learning as much as everyone else was that was coming there to hire us. That's a never ending path. You never ever stop learning about your business, how to run your business, how to deal with people, and how to do your craft. That never ends. It still happens every week today. There's no point at which you go, I'm an expert, there's nothing else to learn. And it's just not how life works, period. You never stop learning. And if you feel like you don't need to learn anything more, it's time to retire.
So you're still learning?
Every day.
Wow. And so what is the place that you start to learn? Are you actually learning proactively? You're going proactively, meaning you're going out and looking to learn new things, or are you finding opportunities to learn when you're working with your clients? Like, what is that learning process like?
There's new techniques that, because the gear is always changing, and gear, now we're talking computer stuff, because hardware is almost not a thing anymore. It's all computer based. And so you're learning new software is really what it boils down to. And because you're learning new tools with the software, you're learning new ways to get to the final result or get to the product, because you're learning about new software that's constantly being evolved. And then I find that the techniques that I use, those evolve over time. How I mix a record today is not the same way that I would have mixed a record a year ago, or 5 years before that, or certainly 10 years before that. So it's just always evolving. So you have no choice but to keep learning, because the tools keep changing. So you have to learn.
So what do you think makes your mixing style so unique? And how do you actually define yourself? Because sometimes I've gotten into conversations with you where you say to me, I'm not a producer, I'm a mixing engineer. You know what I mean? You're laughing, but
I'm laughing because I might tell people that, and then I find little sneaky ways to.
Well, can you talk about that? Because I think what I'm ultimately trying to get at is, why is someone hiring you over another mixing engineer? Can you talk a little bit about what makes Craig Bauer so special? I know how I feel. I know how I felt when I've worked with you, and that's why we've called you and hired you back. But can you articulate a little bit differently?
Well, there's the business side of dealing with people and dealing with clients, and then there's the music side of dealing with people and dealing with clients. And frankly, my musical background and my understanding of musical form, of music theory, of constructing a song, of things that are in tune or not in tune. It's my musical background that probably makes me as good as I am as what I do. Frankly, that sounded really conceited, didn't it?
No, it did not. I mean, you have to just be. No, that is not conceited. I'm asking you why people hire you, and you're explaining your expertise. So no, absolutely not. Don't be humble right now, please.
Okay, don't be humble.
I'm
the best ever.
Don't be humble.
And in 30 years of experience, it certainly doesn't hurt. Understanding the craft of how songs are constructed, understanding balance of instrumentation, understanding how they use the tools. I mean, all these things add up to being good at your craft. And it's a very different time now because of computers. Everyone under the sun who is in music, plays an instrument, owns a computer, calls themselves a mixing engineer, which, frankly, just because you own a computer and know how to, hit record on a piece of software doesn't necessarily make you a good mixing engineer. Try telling that to someone who's 24 right now, and you're going to get an earful back about, well, we don't need you anymore because we can do this all ourselves. I'm sure you're familiar with the Dunning-Kruger terminology of everyone thinks they're an expert because they don't know what they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
which is what the learning process is over a period of decades. So yes, you can understand how to turn volume up on a track. You can understand basic, concepts of mixing, but that doesn't make you an expert. Take a decade, and then you'll look back from, when you called yourself an expert at 24, and at 34 go, oh, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Yeah.
And more on that. So there was a while ago when you told me that you don't have virgin ears anymore. It's hard for you to listen to music because you're, a mixing engineer, and you just don't listen to music that way. So there's two questions behind that. One, when you're a writer, you have to read a lot of books to become a better writer, right?
Yes.
I don't know if yeah. So when it comes to your craft, do you have to listen to a ton of music at this point to still continue to stay fresh? And are your ears, like you said, your mixing, 20 years ago has devolved to what you're mixing today. Do you feel like you have, like you're listening differently? Like what kinds of things do you have to do to be better, right? I mean, because like some of these young people, they're listening to the same music over and over again, and they're basically recycling the same sounds. Whereas I know, when we walked into your studio, and for other people that have a wider palette of music they listen to, they really can take things from here, here, and here and apply them. I think that really makes the best musicians, but I also think that makes the best people in the recording studio. So how do you feel about those ideas?
Well, everyone only listens to I don't mean only, but mostly listens to the type of music that they're interested in. So a lot of artists don't spend a lot of time listening to things outside of the genre that they're most interested in. As someone who works or worked with people in all genres, literally, you get pushed music on you that you wouldn't have listened to otherwise. I mean, we can get into the conversation of someone who grew up in the whitest neighborhood ever, who now spends more time working with urban artists than I certainly do with white people. So I was just exposed to all kinds of music, and now you have to suddenly learn how to work appropriately for the genre and the people that have hired you. There's no way around that. There's a weird thing now where you spend so much time working on music that you don't actually have time to go and listen to new music. So new music in any genre comes to you. You don't go to it. Like working on pop music right now is very different than working on pop music 10 years ago and 10 years ago, before that.
What makes it different? What's the difference?
Well, there's this thing now called the volume wars where everything is so, the goal for most artists or a lot of pop artists, how loud can we make this over almost anything else? And you're laughing, but it is it can be the bane of my existence because people care less about balances and tonality, and then as they do of it needs to be louder, it needs to be louder. That's a factor of people working at home and doing stuff themselves and not understanding what happens when you make something so unbelievably loud that it's sitting on the edge of distortion. And has become the thing that is ironically most important than almost anything else. Is it's got to be as loud as anything else or louder than anything else that shows up on Spotify. It's an interesting times, and I could spend 2 hours talking about that.
I mean, I do remember what I respected about working with you was you were, again, and I said this in the very beginning, you worked in concert with the artist, whatever they're asking for, you'd find a way to create the vision and the sonic experience that they wanted. But you did bring in we absolutely cannot do that. That's broken. That's a broken sound. It's not going to work. Like, you know what I mean? But you still found your way to get through. But that's really what I loved about working with you, is that you did not get offended or upset by desires that we would have in the studio. You never made fun of us or laughed in a way that, belittled our what we wanted, even if you didn't agree with it. So, and I feel like I'm hearing that now. I know you're talking about sound wars, but ultimately at the end of the day, based on, my experience working with you, you're still going to get the job done, which I think is amazing. I'm kind of curious, you're talking about different types of music that comes into your studio that you maybe weren't familiar with or didn't know about, or, you've just, in some ways by hook or by crook, listened to different types of music. How do you actually mix music that you don't like? How does that even work?
You mean on a song basis or on a genre basis?
I mean, whatever basis, like, doing something you hate, like, you're just like, but I guess, like, if I were to answer you, I'd say, well, I love mixing, so it doesn't matter what it sounds like. I'm enjoying this process. But then sometimes you're like, music is like an emotional thing, like,
well, it can be, I'll use the word challenging. But here we are talking about the business side versus the musical side again. Whereas you're hired to do a job, you have to understand the artist's vision, and therefore you have to go after that. Doesn't mean I have to like every single song or love every single song that comes in. It certainly can be more enjoyable experience if you happen to love the material. That doesn't change my perfectionism in getting to the same result of having the best possible product that the client absolutely loves. Now, the other odd thing about that is sometimes the best possible sonic product isn't necessarily what the client loves, and so now you're catering to a sound that, in one's opinion or my opinion or anyone who does this opinion, could be better, but it's not what the client wants. So, and then you can have careful conversations with the client about, well, I believe if we could get to a better place sonically if we do this, this, and this without ruining your vision. And some people are open to that, and some people are like, no, I want it to sound like this. And then you have to, carefully cater to a client and carefully suggest things and say, here's something we can do, and here's something I believe we should do, and they can say yes, or they can say no, or they can say they're open to hearing something, and then they can tell you they don't like it. And, negotiating, dealing with clients is obviously the most difficult part of all of this, way more so than the technical side of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's the artist temperament. I mean, we're a pain in the ass. I mean, I'm an artist. We're a pain in the ass.
I spent 15 years with Kanye West. You want to talk about dealing with artist temperament?
I love it. I do want to talk about Kanye. I'd love to talk about Kanye because it's a great lead into. So now you work. You don't have as large of a staff as you used to, right? I mean, I remember.
I don't have any staff anymore.
Exactly. So you don't have any staff. I just remember there was one song we were working on, Craig, in your studio. And Grant and I were like obsessed with this one particular part, and we spent like 3 hours on it. And I remember you looked at me and said, "You literally passed the baton to Steve. You're like, Steve, you got to take over. I'm out."
Fortunately, I don't remember this, but I'll take your word for it.
You're like, "I'm out. I'm out of here, dude." And it was great. You passed it on to Steve Johnson.
Oh my
but here's what I want to know though. So back then you had a collection of people around you, and those people really did work beautifully with you. They worked beautifully with clients. When you were in there with, Kanye and Lupe, and you had all those people, what was that? We can just specifically talk about Kanye. What was that dynamic like? And when you had Kanye in the studio, I mean, I'm sure we could spend an hour talking about that, but
we could spend 3 weeks talking about that.
3 weeks talking about Kanye. And I love Ye. I really do. I love his music, and I love all the clips I'm seeing of him. But what was that experience like with him in the studio? And did you know when he was there that he was big time then? Was he like, he wasn't even big time. He was a regular guy, right?
His entire career started with me in my studio. Literally, he was one of my very first clients in the very first handful of months of opening my studio. He started in a 3-person rap group and quickly left that and went solo. And I didn't have to wonder if he was going to be successful. He would tell you every hour from the first. I don't mean that in a negative way. He had no problem telling me in 1993 that he was going to be the biggest artist on the planet of all time. We could literally talk about this for hours. But he left this 3-person R&B group and went solo, and he would come into my studio, and because you didn't do stuff at home, he would bring in his MPC drum machine. He would program stuff on the spot and walk into the live room in front of a microphone and start doing rapping on his tracks. And ultimately he got a connection to Diddy, oddly enough, at this moment in time. I used to work with him till 3:00 in the morning regularly, 3 days a week. And this is just when the internet was becoming a thing, and you'd have what was known as an FTP server, and you would upload a track that would take an hour, and he would send it off to, and over a very long period of time, he ultimately developed enough relationships where he got a record deal.
So hang on. Are you saying that when he was in your studio, that first of all, he came in alone, he didn't have an entourage, he didn't have
Correct.
a label, he didn't have people,
Correct.
and he was just you and him, and you're like, who else was there? Steve, who else was in the studio with you then?
In the middle of the night, it was me and him alone for years, probably 2 years.
And okay, so you were alone in the studio with Kanye, and you were just vibing with him, or were you like?
There was no vibing. He was exactly who he is today in 1993 and 94. Nothing has changed.
So my
Zero.
my question is though, what you were the mixing engineer? What other role did you play? Were you just were you a muse?
No, I was recording him and mixing his stuff, and he would just, there was no collaboration involved in that. if that's what you're asking.
I am kind of asking that. I'm asking if there was a collaboration.
No. He would program his beats, and he would rap, and I would record it, and then ultimately we would send it off through an FTP server, and it would take an hour to upload one song, and it went on for a very long period of time.
Was there conversation? I mean, were you sort of like laughing sometimes? Was there food? I mean, there was no cell phones, right? So like, was he sometimes calling his mom, Donda? Like, what was going on?
I don't really remember there being like, hey, let's go, grab some dinner. There was none of that. It was me and him alone, and he would just program his beats, and like I said, I don't personally dislike Kanye West. I know that, either you love him or you hate him or you don't understand him. It's one of those three things. I have a fondness for that period of time because of what that turned into. His entire career started in my studio, and then I was with him for 15 years.
So what happened next? So you did this you did the first album, and then like.
Well, no, I recorded what ultimately became College Dropout. I wasn't asked to mix any of it, which was extremely painful and hurtful for me at that time, having been the one there from the very beginning and helped develop or record what was developed into College Dropout.
I feel that.
After College Dropout, he moved to LA, and we were still in contact. And then he hired, on his second record, which was Late Registration, when it was recorded, he hired 4 mixing engineers to mix every single song. There were 4 of us mixing every single song, to the point where he couldn't keep track of ultimately whose mixes of the 4 of us made it onto the record. 8 of the 12 songs on Late Registration are my mixes. I think I'm only credited properly in 6 or 7 of them, maybe 5 or 6. Also, very hurtful. That album was nominated for Album of the Year. Uh,
Yeah, so I hear trauma in this this conversation. I mean, I hear trauma in multiple levels, and I mean, seriously, to be around that type of a talent in at that early stage, it's I can't even imagine what it must have felt like to be in that whirlwind as he was ascending and getting bigger and bigger, but still in his probably most fruitful, luscious time of his creative life.
those first three records, that is Kanye West. All those, and I was involved in all three of those. I was in the second and third one were both nominated for Album of the Year. Neither one of them won. Um, Painful as well. I've anyone that I've ever worked with, I'm really known for two things, which one of them is that, and the other one couldn't be more hilarious. But the other thing, there's no one on the planet that has not seen Justin Timberlake and Adam Sandberg on SNL in Mother Lover. And when I tell people that I mixed that, there isn't a person on the planet that hasn't seen that.
So, were they in the studio at the same time? Was that happening at the same time as Kanye?
No, that was in the 2000s, and they weren't in the studio for that. I was just hired to mix it. I got a call on a Friday morning to mix that track without being told what it was. I had no idea, and I was sent this track with Justin Timberlake with the music and lyrics for Mother Lover, and it wasn't bleeped out, and I'm like, what in God's name is this? And it wasn't until after it was finished that I was told it was the follow-up to the previous version of their SNL. Everyone knows Dick in a Box. This was the follow-up to that, and I wasn't told what it was for until afterwards.
So he wasn't in the studio. So did you ever get to meet
No.
Justin Timberlake ever in real
Yes,
life?
because afterwards, then I actually worked with him a couple times in LA.
Oh, you did.
Yes.
All right. Well, getting back to Kanye real quick. I mean, I love you. I love Justin Timberlake. I love him so much. He's one of my. I mean, people laugh at me like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, no, he's totally cool. I've always loved him."
He couldn't have been
He's
nicer.
so cool.
Now,
Yeah.
going back to Kanye.
I can tell he's a nice dude. You know, but so Kanye, these three records, did it ever get to a point where everyone in his circle was starting to come into the studio, or what was actually happening? Like I mean, you look back at some of these tapes. And, yes, I want to know. Like, was there candles and incense and weed?
I have endless stories about this. You know that, right? Endless.
You gotta tell something as we're here. Like, you gotta tell some, because I have a hilarious Lupe fiasco story when I was in your studio. But what's one of the ones that jumps out at you?
As Kanye rose to fame and as he got bigger and bigger, the entourage got bigger and bigger. And when he would be in the studio, there would literally be 10 people in the back of the room carrying on, seriously carrying on while you're sitting in the at a mixing console, listening to music, trying to work with this madness going on behind you.
What's the madness?
Just loud, people partying in the back of a control room while you're trying to work. And it was not a small entourage. No. And there's a song on Late Registration that was a huge hit called Heard Him Say. I think we did 50 versions of that mix. And he was in LA at the time, and he flew into Chicago to, do the final wrap up on this. So all of his Chicago buddies were in the control room while he would be sitting next to me, and we were trying to get through this thing. And that was a long day. At the time, in hindsight, you couldn't be more thankful for it. But I mean, here's a hilarious Kanye story. As he was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, anytime he was in the studio in Chicago, anytime he was there would be the entourage of people. And there was always one guy that was with him who would be in the back of the room, and people were carrying on like mad, but he would be sitting in the back of the room, and nobody talking to him and him not talking to anybody else for hours and hours. And this happened on multiple occasions. And we would, after they were gone, we were like, what's with the one dude that nobody talks to? And he would just sit there and say absolutely nothing. finally, during the session, during a late registration, heard him say, same thing, all his friends carrying on, the same one dude in the back of the room that nobody talked to. At one point, Kanye was sitting next to me, and he kind of looks up and scratches his face and says, man, my beard itches. At which point, this dude in the back of the room jumps, runs out of the room, comes back 5 minutes later with a little duffel bag, pulls out a razor and an extension cord, and asks me where he can plug it in, and then grooms him sitting at my mixing console for the next 40 minutes.
He's legend. That is such a flex. That is such a flex.
Yeah, his name is Ivan. We now know who he is, and he was there multiple times. I mean, it's
wow.
classic stuff.
And see, again, like I feel like, I don't know Kanye. I'd love to meet him someday, but
Kanye would love to meet Kanye someday.
You know what? But I mean, here's the thing. Like, seriously, in all seriousness, I feel that if he felt even a fraction of what I felt walking into your studio, that's why he was in there for those first 3 records, because there was something very unique and magical about Hinge.
We would have to ask him. I don't really know.
I'm just saying there was something magical about Hinge in Chicago. I mean, you walked in, like I said, and you felt like you were in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing for your music. And I also remember, and this is, testament to your ability to build your agency, your studio, and build your reputation, and still having people come back to you over and over again through all these years. You never ever broke your spirit when you were in there. Like I feel like.
Oh, really?
Well, listen, don't take that away from me, because I'm telling you, I know how you think you felt, but one of the things that determines success in business or not is whether you can withstand and have resilience and just keep going through it, no matter what you're faced with, right? Like, no matter what someone's asking you, no matter what is happening, you're still able to maintain your own essence, your own creativity, your own ideas, but also your freaking composure, for God's sakes. Like, I remember you told me a story once, like Janet Jackson was in the studio. There were candles and incense and like those thousands of flowers, and it was like the queen walked in with flower petals on the ground or something, like, you know what I mean? And you accommodated all those things because you really are in service to the artist, Craig. And I think sometimes you're a little too humble about that. But and I'm not going to put words in Kanye's mouth, but he wouldn't have come back there if he didn't feel a sense of creative space for calm.
Here's how I can agree with what you're saying. After graduation, his graduation album, which is, huge record, I hadn't seen him in many, many, many years or heard from him. And the day I left Chicago and moved to LA, that very day I landed in LA, I'm walking in front of a coffee shop in Studio City and ran into his manager, who is the guy that brought him to me in 1993. Out of sheer happenstance, ran into him on the street. And he said to me, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "I just moved here." And he said, "Oh, we're having this huge record release party for Tiana Taylor downtown. You got to come." And I'm like, "Cool, absolutely." So me and my wife found our way to this enormous warehouse in downtown LA. Here we are in this warehouse for this record release party. It's packed. Absolutely packed. There's a bar in front, and me and my wife are standing in the back, kind of away from people in the chaos. And we were there for an hour. And finally, an hour into this, you hear and you see paparazzi, and you see everyone rushing towards the door of this warehouse. And you had to take 3 steps down to get to the level of the warehouse. He walks into the doorway, and Kim Kardashian is behind him. And he's kind of surveying the room and seeing what's going on. And he makes eye contact with me in the back of this warehouse where nobody else is. And he makes a beeline to me, leaves Kim Kardashian standing at the door and paparazzi everywhere. I'm wondering, where is he going? He runs up to me literally bear hugs me and picks me up off the ground. We have a 2 minute conversation. This is in 2013. Have a 2 minute conversation, and that was the last time I saw him. So if there's any acknowledgement of what you just said, I suppose that would be it.
Mm-hmm. It's real. I mean, it's totally real. I feel like, Grant and I would, our 3 records, I mean, they're right here. There's, This is Comfort for the Traveler, which is one of the most phenomenal records we made. And Rodeo Queen, which is another one. And then our first one, Wonder Wheel, which is the one that we made the most money on. But our careers would not have been to the extent they are were it not for that magical place called Hinge Studios in Chicago. It really was stunning. And, I wish I could.
You know what's interesting to me?
What?
You know how you're so naive that you think you could start a business like that and be successful?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, because now, if you go, well, if I know what I know now about anything in life, that was the dumbest idea ever, to think that I was going to open up a recording studio in downtown Chicago when there were 4 other major recording studios that had been there forever. And I'm going to, at 29 years old or 8 years old, come in and open up this recording studio and think I'm going to beat these other 4 guys that have been there forever. It was the most naive thing I can possibly think of. And I would never have the gumption to do it now.
And you know what? We actually went to those studios too. Like, we actually did interview people because we were trying to find the right vibe. So somehow that vibe worked. And, you must have, when you were, was Kanye when you felt a tipping point in your studio? Was that when you realized that you were in that big time place, or was it something else?
Kanye, what period of time?
I don't know. I don't know. I guess I'm kind of asking, like, it's almost like, there was a point when I realized with my company, I thought, oh my God, this is real. Like, it was like, I was like, this is the real deal. Like, it's really happening. I mean, when was that a Kanye piece at any point for the relationship with him?
It's not an easy question. I mean, there was some point where I realized that I actually was competing with these other studios and that they weren't thrilled that I was there. Here's the thing: you open up a business like this, it's something in the creative arts, and then there's this one mystical goal out there that you've dreamt about your entire life. I want to be a guy who gets to this party and this little award show that is shown on TV every single year. And your single goal in life when you start a business like this, I want to get from just some guy that opens a recording studio to getting to go to this little party where they give away these little trophies called a Grammy. And so you spend every minute of these numbers of years going, I want one of those. And the funny thing was, when I think back about this, is that I frankly come from a family that was more pessimistic than optimistic. So I sort of had that sort of built into my brain structure that, oh, this isn't going to be possible. Like, I'll never get there. And you keep telling yourself for years and years, like, I'm trying really hard, but what's the likelihood this is going to happen? It's never going to happen. And in 2006, when I don't know what the turning point was, but there was just this year where I forced myself to stop thinking negatively. And I said at the beginning of that year, I'm going to make this happen this year. And I spent the entire year forcing myself to think positively. I was nominated for 3 Grammys that year.
What were they?
One of them was a gospel, or 2 of them might have been gospel records, and one of them was Kanye for Album of the Year. I mean, why not start at the top? We'll start with Album of the Year.
And what was that like? What was that feeling like when that happened? Were you just like, wait, what year was that?
2006.
Okay.
I mean, this is 13 years after the studio opened. And I spent 12 years telling myself it's not possible. I know there were 3. If you ask me exactly which ones those were, I know one of them was a gospel record, or maybe 2 of them were. One of them was Kanye.
I'm kind of curious. That was I think to myself, you have worked in so many genres of music. The last genre I would ever think you'd work on would be gospel. How in the world did you get into the gospel space?
As a white Jewish kid from Cleveland?
Exactly.
Why would you think that?
Exactly. Like, what the heck is going on?
No one is more surprised about that than me. I can't tell you. To me, it was no different than being hired to work on hip hop records. The studio just became popular, and that's where people just went to. And so these genres were just, they came to me. I obviously didn't go to them. I mean, I don't think we want to get into a discussion about race, but for a white guy who didn't have a single African American in my school, when this started descending upon the studio, you're not familiar with this culture at all. There was a very big learning curve, and I was never a racist person. None of that ever dawned on me at all. But it's something that you're so unbelievably unfamiliar with that it's just culture shock.
Yeah, but when I first met you, though, I thought you were black. I was like, he's part black.
Well,
I was like, he's got Mick Jagger lips. He's part black.
Yeah, unfortunately, you couldn't have been more wrong. So there,
I'm sorry.
I mean, yeah, well, there was a big learning curve there.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, I talked about this the other day with Lenny Stern. You know, about the beautiful space where he started working with a black elected politician to help him get elected, and it was from there, working with President Obama, and that you become very immersed in culture, and you learn about community and language and all kinds of beautiful things that happen, and it is transformative, and it makes complete sense to me that you were, first of all, you're open, not afraid, not scared, not worried.
I don't know if afraid's the wrong word.
Well, I mean in the context of race. In the context of race, there's people scared.
The unfamiliarity with it was intimidating. Afraid's the wrong word, but
that's fair.
You have to learn. If you've never been exposed to that, you have to learn how to negotiate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
there's nothing racist about saying that, but you can't know how to deal with anything until you're exposed to it. Mm-hmm. And there was a great deal of it between hip hop and R&B and gospel music. How about becoming acquainted with African Americans that are doing gospel music from a white Jewish kid? Like, that disparity couldn't be any bigger. And I don't know how many Grammy plaques on the wall for doing gospel records. I won a Grammy for doing a gospel record. It's just it's fascinating to me how things happen in life, and how these things change, and how you change, and how you grow, and how you adapt. And now when I see, we got to be careful. Now when I see people that don't respect other people, regardless of race, creed, or religion, it really angers me. Like, it just does, because it's so unbelievably silly.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, because we've actually talked about that before, and I know for me as a black woman in America, I'm very sensitive to aura and vibes and like feelings, and I can understand when there's a place where I'm like, that is not going to really work. That's not a relationship that's gonna vibe. There's some problems there. I sense them. I see them. I can see you, and I know you. You can put one thing on your face, and I have a sense of what's happening underneath. And there's all kinds of ways to do that. That's what Black Americans have to do to survive. Like, we have to be very cognizant of people's expressions and their body language, and even some of the things that they don't say when they're speaking. That's just how we are. We can't help it. We have like a sixth sense about it. So I love that you bring that up, because I think, gospel is a whole nother level. My son, Dexter Birkenbeuel, who's studying at the Manhattan School of Music, he's actually become very passionate about gospel music. And now he plays every Sunday at his church. He's playing piano, and it's really taken him into a completely different direction musically. Not taking him completely off jazz, but it's opened up another stem of creativity and music and culture that he didn't grow up with. Because we did not grow up in the church. We did not grow up with gospel music at all.
I didn't grow up with any religion at all.
I didn't.
I'm culturally white and I'm culturally Jewish, but I am not religious in any sense.
This is part 1 of my conversation with the founder of Hinge Studios, Craig Bauer. Stay tuned for part 2. The Honest Field Guide is produced by the team at Birk Creative, where brand and multi-channel strategies are designed to help you get attention, grow, scale, and keep up with the pace of change. The music on the podcast is written and performed by Utah Carroll. You can find their songs everywhere online to buy or stream. The opinions expressed on the Honest Field Guide are solely those of the hosts and guests.